Thanks for staying with us right here on Sunrise as we continue this morning. Now, a National Assembly resolution allowing land expropriation without compensation will now be referred to the Constitutional Review Committee, which must report back to Parliament by August this year. Now, the National Assembly on Tuesday passed the African National Congress ANC amendment to the Economic Freedom Fighters' motion for land expropriation without compensation. Now, the burning issue, land expropriation without compensation, has caused a lot of panic. Nonetheless, the President of the Republic has urged people not to panic. He says it's critical for South Africans to engage and come up with proposals on the matter going forward. Now, this morning we delve further on the issue. We're joined by SAFTU Deputy General Secretary Moleko Phakedi, as well as Attorney Bulelwa Mabasa. You at home can be part of our discussion by calling us on 011-447-1742 or 011-447-1620. Your comments are also welcome on our Facebook and Twitter pages. Okay, so Bulelwa, let's start off our conversation with you. When first, earlier on, around about December actually, when this issue was discussed as part of the ANC's policy conference, you raised a few concerns about that, and the issue so far has developed to where things are right now. Let's just recap on what some of the areas of concern you raised.
Look, firstly, Section 25 is a section in the Constitution that deals with expropriation. And currently, the Section 25 Constitution makes provision that when expropriation takes place, it must be subject to compensation. So we're dealing currently with a constitutional framework that envisages that compensation must happen. Although the section doesn't say that, compensation doesn't mean market value. It doesn't mean willing buyer, willing seller. So the argument is that the Constitution as is, even before being amended, already makes provision that there are certain circumstances where compensation might not be necessary. So, in other words, my argument is that we don't need an amendment in order to make sure that land reform happens.
Okay, so you guys as SAFTU, you feel that this is the right direction that the country is taking in terms of amending the Constitution. What informs that?
Absolutely. Penny, because you'd appreciate that the 1913 Land Native Act took rightful ownership of the land from the black majority in this republic. You would appreciate that the 1948 all-white election gave power to the National Party that introduced about 12 pieces of legislation targeted at black majority Africans, driving this issue of land dispossession. You would appreciate that your 1990 up to your 1994 era, or for that matter post-1994, only 3 pieces of legislation were passed by this government in trying to bring about the necessary redress. Your land, for argument's sake, your Land Rights Act, which is also issue of restitution, your, for argument's sake, Extension of Security, Tenure Act, which have not necessarily made any dent. The issue fundamentally is that the Constitution should have long been amended. That was a compromise that was very dear to the African people at that time. And I believe, and we believe so as SAFTU, that this is long overdue. ANC would have long amended the Constitution. They had a 2/3 majority. They didn't use that. They were given the numbers by the EFF before this conference. They didn't do it. They are doing it now. We believe they don't do that out of opportunistic political gains and merely for purpose of bringing about the dignity and humanity of an African majority in this country. So that Section 25 amendment is long overdue and it's necessary.
Okay, so so let's try and understand that for those of us who might not understand constitutional law. What exactly is the process that's going to happen and what we need to understand about this amendment?
Look, what happened on Tuesday was that the Parliament was given a mandate to start unpacking Section 25 in order to make it possible to expropriate without compensation. And may I also, clarify the fact that there's Section 25(8) in the Constitution that says Section 25 may not be used to impede objectives against land reform. So already as it is, the Constitution provides for those circumstances where land reform, restitution and security of tenure must happen. The issue is that those, those three concepts haven't really been implemented in the way that it was envisaged in the Constitution.
Previously.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so when you ask about what happened in Parliament, there's a mandate now for the Parliamentary Committee to engage in stakeholder engagements and consultations to find out how this section can be amended in order to make expropriation without compensation to happen. So let me recap and say, we believe that it is still possible without an amendment to expropriate without compensation, because each case must be looked at its own basis. The constitutional Section 25 says that you must take different factors into account. So each case must be looked at its own basis. So in other words, if it can be shown that the history of the acquisition of the property was such that land was dispossessed and there was no compensation paid, market value is part of what you look at. You look at whether there were any improvements. It is possible when you look at those factors to come to the conclusion that in a particular case, compensation may not be deemed to be necessary.
Okay.
But here's the point. The Section 25 Act exists since the enactment of the Constitution, 1996 to date. And it has been absolutely impossible to expropriate land without compensation. You would have two legislations that were passed to try and bring about the necessary change. The first was the restitution of land rights, which have not necessarily helped this government. Because
well, it hasn't fast-tracked the process.
They were first stuck at the willing buyer, willing seller situation, and then the court had to be the arbiter on the price. Since the market price was not affordable, we have not made any meaningful progress. You can go into the stats and check the number of land that has been restituted. Percentage is so slim. It's close to nothing, so to say. It's the same numbers of people who resided on a land during the 1913 Land Act, as is the case now. So nothing literally have changed with the existence of that constitution. The second part is this thing of the property rights that are being seriously and highly raised at the helm of this Section 25, as if African people don't have any right to claim the land as their rightful property. And indeed, it is their rightful property. And for that matter, the Constitution is not in sync with that particular historic birthright, I want to argue, that an African black person has. And the Constitution does not in any way intend to perpetuate a skew ownership of land in this republic, where you have a 10% or so less of the population owning about 93% of this land is not on. And it should change that constitution to give effects. Legislation must be passed such that we realize a true land restitution, we realize a true land ownership. And land ownership, in our case, we are not pro-ownership of land by private owners, so to say. We believe that the state must own the land and must redistribute the land for those who would use the land, if you know what I mean. Okay. And that is an important point that I think must be understood, that the Constitution have not allowed us to ensure that the land is brought to its rightful owners.
Well, we'd like you to be part of our conversation as well this morning, so feel free to give us a call on 011-447-1742 or 011-447-1620. All of that will be continuing right here on the show. In a short while, we'll take a break and, of course, and take a look at what's going on in the news in Afrikaans. Okay, so then the big question is, then there's a lot of panic, and the question that's coming out of whose land is it and who's got the land. Yesterday, numbers came out, and it really looks shocking that Africans own nearly like 4% or so of the land. So how do we deal with that?
Yeah, look, I think it's the issue that I was raising to say the Constitution hasn't been the hurdle. The hurdle has been the implementation of it. So the Constitution is yet to be implemented to its fullest potential. It hasn't. It has remained untouched. And that is one of the problems. The second fundamental issue is that at the moment, the funding of the land project in South Africa has been in the hands of the state. The project of land has only received less than 1% of the national budget. So there's an issue of who must fund this project, number one. So far, it's been the state. It was only constituted by less than, as I said, 1%. What that means then is that in order to solve this land project, we must decide whether or not it is the duty of the democratic government to pay for land to be received. And when you ask who's paying for that, it's obviously taxpayers who might have also been victims of, or rather descendants of victims of dispossession. We haven't yet gotten to the grips of who must actually fund this problem. It's one of the issues that we need to